I'd like to introduce to you a topic tonight that I rarely talk about. It is a topic that oftentimes makes us uncomfortable, and I, generally speaking, prefer to think of positive things. And generally, I do not think of hell as a positive thing. But what is hell? I think it's good for us to know, to understand what hell is. There are 4 words in the Bible that are translated as hell in most translations. And I say most translations because that's a general statement. Some translations, particularly more modern translations, do not translate all those words as hell. The 3 of the primary, one only appears one time, and I'm not even going to talk about it tonight for time's sake. But the one in the Old Testament, which is in the Hebrew language, is Sheol. And I want to begin by saying Sheol has 2 different distinct meanings. One means the place of the dead or the grave. If someone dies, we would say that they went to Sheol, okay? Or the second meaning for that word is eternal hell, okay? Your King James, if you're studying out of King James or New King James, that translation renders that word hell almost everywhere. Occasionally, I believe that it does render it grave. But generally speaking, that word is rendered as hell. In the New Testament, there are 2 different words primarily that are translated hell. The first is Hades, which is the realm of the dead. It takes on that spiritual realm where departed souls go, and we have studied that in the past here. So I'm going to gloss over that pretty much in our study, because that is not eternal hell, even though your King James Version almost every time consistently translates it as hell. And I have no problem with that, other than it can be confusing when you're trying to study about hell, because the King James Version will translate that as hell the same as it translates the word Gehenna. Gehenna, even though it's in the New Testament, is not a Greek word, and we'll get into that in a little while. That word means eternal hell, a place of torment for eternity. And so the 4th word is completely different, and it is only used by the Apostle Peter. And I believe that Peter used that because of the descriptive nature of Gehenna. But the word that Peter uses is for eternal hell, and I believe it is used in that context as well. But we'll get into that in a little while. First of all, I ask myself, this was a requested topic, by the way. It was requested by Alita Grimes, and I appreciate her interest in this. And I ask myself, why? Why do we want to study hell? Well, I think hell serves a purpose. You know, when I was a child, I grew up with a wood cook stove in the kitchen. And my mother would take my hand, and as well as my siblings' hands. I was a little older when we got the wood cook stove actually installed in the kitchen. But Mama would take our hand, and she would hold our hand close to that stove, and we could feel the heat. And it would get hot enough, we would get uncomfortable, and we would begin to pull our hand back, and Mama would say, hot. And she would say hot, and she would move it just a little bit closer, and we would pull it back a little bit more. What that did was taught us a lesson. That taught us to respect and, I dare say, fear that stove. Now, eventually, I think all of us got burned at one time or another on that cook stove. Some of us were a little slower to learn than maybe some other people might have been. But what that did was it instilled in us a respect and a fear for what that stove was about. And I use that stove because when we talk about hell, when the Bible talks about hell, it talks of a place of eternal fire when we're talking about eternal hell. And so as human beings, we're oftentimes motivated to avoid pain. I'm not afraid of dying. I'll tell you that right now. I am not afraid of dying. I don't want to leave my wife. I don't want to leave my kids yet. I don't want to leave them vulnerable. But let me tell you what I am afraid of. I don't like pain. I do not like pain. Ask my wife, my pain tolerance is zilch. Typical man, right, Julie? You know, men, I don't know what it is about us. We don't like pain. If I had a great aunt that one time told my grandmother, she was my grandfather's aunt. She told my grandmother, she said, Wyona, if men had to give birth, there'd never be more than one child. Aunt Gladys only had two. She was a fast learner. My wife, on the other hand, there's no hope for her. But we don't, as men, we don't like pain. I don't think we could go through that. I don't know. Man, I don't think women like pain any better, do they, Patty? She's back there shaking her head. So I understand that. Pain is a great motivator. And fear of pain is a greater motivator, perhaps. And so I think it does do us good to talk about hell, to understand what it is we as Christians seek to avoid. But a well-founded understanding of that can give us motivation for a righteous life. Now let's get into these words that are translated hell, what they mean. The word Sheol is spelled S-H-E-O-L, is the Old Testament word. It's a Hebrew word. It's translated hell in most of your Bibles. My Bible as well. Now I want to look at Psalm 88 for just a minute. Remember, I told you that this has two meanings. In the book of Psalms 88, verse 1 through 7, this is a dark, dark psalm. David is in a dark place. David usually does not allow himself to become into a dark place. But this psalm, and it was written for music, it was to be sang, is a very depressing psalm. And we feel David's depression. As we read this, I would ask that you notice verse 3 and 5. And I'm not sure what your translation might say. I'll be reading from the ESV, which uses the word Sheol. So Psalm 88, verse 1, O Lord, God of my salvation, I cry out day and night before you. Let my prayer come before you. Incline your ear to my cry. For my soul is full of troubles, and my life draws near. My translation says, to Sheol. Some of your translations may possibly say that my life draws near to hell. I am counted among those who go down. Notice this, in the Old Testament in particular, hell is always seen as a low place and a dark place. David says, I am counted among those who go down into the pit. I am a man who has no strength, like one set among the dead, like the slain that lie in the grave, like those whom you remember no more, for they are cut off from your hand. You have put me in the depths of, again, the pit, in the regions of dark and deep. Your wrath lies heavy upon me, and you overwhelm me with your waves, Selah. The word Selah is a musical term, and so we realize, even though we pretty much accept the entire book of Psalms was at one time set to music, the word Selah is generally accepted as a musical term. And we don't know exactly what in Hebrew Selah means. Some would say it means, it is a term for either a tempo or a beat in the music. But we don't know that for sure today. So the word Sheol here appears twice. Once in verse 3, which my translation says Sheol there, and also again in verse 5, where my translation has rendered it lie in the grave. Okay, so there's two places. My English translators feel that in one place it means the realm of the dead. In the other place it simply means the grave. Now again, these two places, it is only used in reference to the realm of the dead, either the grave of the dead or the abode of departed spirits. We've talked before about how when our body and soul separate, the spirit goes to a place the Old Testament refers to as Sheol. The New Testament would call that Hades. I prefer the New Testament descriptive nature of the Hadean realm, and so I tend to call it Hades instead of Sheol, since Hades only has one meaning. Moses describes God's righteous anger as a burning fire. And Moses references those who disobey God will find themselves in eternal hell. Now, this is the same word. It is used in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32. We have divided this out into the Song of Moses. Well, Moses is instructing the children of Israel to sing this song, and we're not going to look at the entire song. You know, I'll be honest with you, our songs are pretty short by comparison to some of the ones the children of Israel sang. But if we look at this Song of Moses, there's a stanza in here. It's broken into paragraphs, but really there's stanzas, just like our songs are broken into stanzas today. I want us to look beginning at verse 15. And Moses is warning the children of Israel about becoming comfortable. He says, but Jerishon grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout and sleek. Then you forsook God. Then he forsook God who made him. There are those in the world, and honestly, I think that's where we are today. The world around us has become so comfortable that we really, as a society, see no need for God. And so the world around us is kind of abandoning him. I've talked to a lot of people, and I know a lot of missionaries who have preached in foreign countries. And one of the things that makes the gospel spread so fast in places like the Philippines, Africa, is that it offers hope to people who have no hope in this life. They're willing to put their faith in something better when they have nothing here in this life. And so I think that's where we are as a society today, if you'll allow me to insert that judgment. But pick up again in verse 16. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. Of course, it's referencing God. People have stirred God to jealousy. When we forsake God, we serve something. Something takes the place of God. If we forsake God, sometimes it's ourselves. Sometimes it's an ideology. I think we see that in the woke culture today. We see an ideology that people are serving. We also see people who serve only their own desires. But nevertheless, the children of Israel, it is prophesied, would serve strange gods. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. I want to insert here again, I'm not trying to take up too much time, but I want to insert, when our children do something that's wrong, first our heart hurts. And then when they continue to do something that's wrong, sometimes it stirs us to anger and we become angry with them. They know better than that. This is God. When we do something wrong, when God's people do something wrong, first it brings God pain. And then it stirs up the anger of God. He's done so much for them. Look at what the children of Israel, it is prophesied that they will do. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to gods that had come recently, whom your fathers never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock. My Bible has capitalized the letter R in the word rock, signifying God. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw it and spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters. And he said, I will hide my face from them. You see, hell is a place where God doesn't exist. Even though he's there, his presence in some form is there, it's almost an absence of God. I will see what their end will be, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is no God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous with those who are no people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns in the depth of, most of your translations will say, hell. It burns. The anger of God burns in the depths of hell. You look at Solomon, what he writes in Proverbs chapter 23, self-control and discipline will prevent one, or at least help to prevent one, from going to such a place. That's really a huge aspect of what's lacking in our lives today. We see something we want to do, we don't give a second thought. We go out, we do it because it's something, well, it's important to me. I'm so sick when I hear that sometimes in context where people are forsaking God and doing what's important. Yes, you're doing what's important to you. By default, we all do what is most important to us. And Solomon writes about child training. Begin with me in Proverbs 23, verse 12. Apply your heart to instruction and your ear to words of knowledge. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with the rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from hell. My translation does use the word shield. But you're going to save us, when we teach a child right from wrong, oftentimes we think of that, we're doing him a favor in society. Not only that, we're saving his soul from hell. Solomon does say also in the book of Proverbs, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he'll not depart from it. Hell is real, and people don't realize it. Again, the word Sheol appears approximately 30 times in the Old Testament and refers to one of two places, either the realm of the dead or Hades or eternal hell. Now let's go to Greek class. Most of you know I like Greek much better than I like Hebrew. And depending on your translation, there may be two words that are used. Hell and Hades, I mentioned both of those a little bit ago. Now Hades it really comes from Greek mythology. It is a word that the Greeks used to describe the realm of the dead. Guess what? No surprise in that. And that's simply what it means. The place of departed, or departed souls, or the grave. It may sometimes be referenced as the grave. And, when we look at Hades, I don't want to get into a lot of this. The Old King James translates it hell. So your old Bibles, 1611, I don't have a problem with that as long as we, in our minds, understand that the word hell in the Old King James means two different places, okay? And so the Greek word Hades here means the place of the dead, the realm of the dead. When our spirit departs our body, that's all death is. It's a separation of body and soul. Okay? Our body, we know it gets put in the ground or it gets cremated, goes back to dust. Nothing to worry about there. However, the soul, who we are inside, departs from our body and it goes to Hades. If you're interested in it, you can look up in Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 19. You will see a description of this place in Lazarus and the rich man. Again, I don't want to go there tonight for time's sake, but you see Hades is divided in half. And you see these two individuals who lived very different lives. If you're wondering about why the rich man's there, it's because of his selfishness. And he is in a section where he's in torment. On the other hand, Lazarus is in the same place, different section, and he is in peace. It's described as being in Abraham's bosom. Not this Abraham, by the way. But he is described as being at peace there. The best way I know to describe it, if you are awaiting trial for a crime and you are guilty and you know that the judge and the prosecuting attorney know that you're guilty and they are going to prove that you are guilty, all you have to look forward to is sentencing. Condemnation and sentencing. On the other hand, if you have died and you know that you have done what God requires of you, to the best of your ability, realizing that God is a loving God, He's a gracious God, then you don't have to fear. You have nothing to be concerned about while your soul is in Hades and you're at peace. If you're about to go before a judge and you know that you are innocent and you can prove that innocence, in fact, if you're a Christian, the pardon has already been paid for you, then you have nothing to worry about. Your soul is at peace. You are resting. You're able to sleep at night. Okay? That's the best way I can describe in a short amount of time Hades. Now let's move into Gehenna. Now you may be familiar with seeing Gehenna spelled G-H-E-H-E-N-N-A-H. The word is spelled, and that's the pronunciation. The word is spelled G-E-E-N-N-A. And Gehenna is actually not Greek, but it is referencing eternal hell. And I find it so fascinating that it is not Greek, but it is two Hebrew words that are put together that Jesus is using in reference to an actual location. Gehenna existed and still exists to this day. If you were to go to Israel, go to Jerusalem, Gehenna would be located southwest of Jerusalem. Okay? Now, I want to stress, Jesus is not talking about the location. What Jesus is doing is Jesus is giving his listeners, and the Apostle Paul, the Apostle John, Peter, James, they seldom use the word Gehenna. Jesus used the word Gehenna more times than anyone else. Okay? And why Jesus used this is he wanted people to have a visual, something that was tangible, that they could see and understand Jesus was describing hell like this place. The first Hebrew word that is used in this two-part word is gay. It means a gorge or deep valley. Now, I love to go down to the New River Gorge. But one of the things that makes that New River Gorge both beautiful and difficult to live in are the steep sides. It's very steep. It is very deep. Okay, when I think of a valley, I think of a more gradual incline to the bottom of the valley. So I prefer to look at this as a gorge. And I believe if you look at Gehenna, that's what Gehenna was and relatively still is. And Hinnom was a Jebusite man. And he lived in this valley, and his sons lived in this particular valley or gorge, and it belonged to them. Gehenna was for tonight's topic, we'll call it a deep gorge or valley, located southwest of Jerusalem. The very same valley. And this is one of the reasons Jesus used this. Some hundreds of years before Jesus' time. Between Moses and Jesus, the children of Israel fell prey to exactly what the Song of Moses said they would. They fell prey to being very comfortable, and they slipped into idolatry. Now, this is not idolatry that we know of today, but I will tell you this. I believe our society is headed to this point. Mike's there. I'm serious. There are things that are just so perverse in our society today that it makes me shudder. And I remember my grandma's cousin saying, well, we're never going to see this in our day. I'm here to tell you guys, we very well may see this kind of action in our lifetime. And what happened was the Israelites began to serve. Your Bible is probably going to say Baal or Baals. Baals is a general term related to idols from, hang on a minute. I lost the place. Anyway, one of the neighboring pagan cultures, okay? The specific idol used here was Moloch. And in 2 Chronicles, if you'll go back there, what we're going to see, I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to deal with nightmares. But I want to read to you what the Bible says. And you can use your imaginations. You can put yourself in this place and you can see exactly what was happening. 2 Chronicles chapter 28 describes a king of Israel that was devoid of feeling. We might say devoid of human emotion. But friends, I believe that it is far worse than devoid of human emotion. I believe it is devoid of God. 2 Chronicles chapter 28, I want to begin in verse 1. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He didn't have a long stint of life. This guy wasn't old. Some of you here are pretty close to his age. How would you like to be a king or a queen? I'll tell you, you'd make a better king or queen than Ahaz. He did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. He even made metal images for the Baals. This is metal images for Moloch. We can look at other Bible passages. We understand that. Some of these images we can look at Historians look at them today. And he made offerings in the valley of the sons of Hinnom. He made offerings in the valley of Gehenna and burned his sons. He offered his children. That's how bad things have gotten. This man offered his own children to an idol, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. And he sacrificed and made offerings in the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. They burned them alive. You can look at that in several other places. 2 Chronicles, I believe it's 33 and verse 6 references that as well. Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 31 and Jeremiah chapter 19 verses 2 through 6. Again, we won't go to all those for time's sake. But this valley is referenced again as a place of judgment. Your King James Version is going to use the word Tophet in Isaiah chapter 30. I'm not going to go there for time's sake again, but look that up. It is referenced as a place of burning. And in this, Tophet is referenced as the place where God has prepared judgment and burning. Now, after 70 years, the children of Israel go into captivity, into Babylon. 70 years this valley has remained empty and vacant, save the statues to Moloch. 70 years Gehenna was empty. When the children of Israel returned, they viewed that place as cursed. They removed those statues. They removed the fiery altars. But because they viewed it as a disgusting place after 70 years of captivity, sometimes people are slow to learn. God had to allow Israel to be utterly destroyed. Jerusalem was gone. The temple was destroyed. The people were either killed or taken captive in exile. It was 70 years. That's approximately 2 to 3 generations that God worked them over like gold is refined in fire. God took the impurities out and he allowed those righteous to remain. And Ezekiel returned and rebuilt Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple. They worked despite all odds. God's people returned to God. And they found this place so disgusting, all they could think of to use it for was a landfill. We see that in 2 Kings chapter 23 and verse 10. It became such a place where the corpses of criminals who had no one to bury them were simply taken and rolled over the edge into this ravine. Dead animals from Jerusalem. What do you do with a dead horse or a donkey? He's done. He's laying dead in the street. What are we going to do with him? Take him to Gehenna. Roll him over the edge. Now today we have things in the landfill. I hate going to the landfill. It reeks. Especially after the West Virginia Department of Transportation or the Ohio Department of Transportation has had a particularly bad deer night. There are dead carcasses. They bring them in on trailer loads, roll them off into the landfill. It's exactly what happened at Gehenna. And it reeks. But guess what? Today, they line the landfill with plastic. We were concerned about plastic pollutions. They line the landfill with plastic. They seal the seams. They push plastic back over top and push dirt over top of that. What that does is traps in what we know of today as methane gas. You go down to the landfill in Parkersburg, there's this great big stack. Fire burning out the top of it all the time. Doesn't matter, summer, winter. I've heard they heat their buildings with the methane gas down there. I don't know if it's true or not. I read an article where, some school close to a landfill in a different state, they were heating a school with methane gas, no problems. You see what happens in Gehenna. Gehenna, as carcasses decay, as garbage decays, methane gas built up in Gehenna. This is the truth. It's not in the Bible. But this is what Jesus is wanting you to see. Now, methane gas, when fire begins, I guess there's three things it takes to make fire. Heat, fuel, and oxygen. Well, what happens when things decompose? They get hot. It's making methane gas at the same time. It's making heat. It's making fuel. Now, I've never personally experienced spontaneous combustion, but I know it exists. There's no doubt in my mind that it exists. But Gehenna, here's the thing. Several years ago out in the Vito area, there's a horse farm out there. They wheeled their manure over the edge of the hill and dumped it time after time after time. The manure pile caught fire. And it burned for weeks. Because what happens is, not all of that methane gas is released at once. There'll be a little bit come up, it's hot enough and ignites. The rest is trapped under the ground with no oxygen. It makes its way to the surface. That's what happens in Gehenna. That is one of the things Jesus wanted us to understand. It is said that Gehenna burned for over 400 years. Gehenna smoldered and burnt. There's this constant stench. I had a passage, I'm not going to have time to go to it tonight. I had a passage in the Old Testament where Sheol is described as a place where the maggots are your bed and worms are your covering. That's Gehenna. It's what the children of Israel, this is what Jesus used the word Gehenna in order to get the children of Israel to get a visual of what hell was like. Imagine for just a moment, I don't mean to be too gruesome, but imagine for a moment that you are buried up to your neck in decomposing nastiness. Maybe there's a dead rabbit over there. And then suddenly you feel something crawling on your skin. And you know that it's a maggot. And as you're roasting in this decomposing nastiness, you're going to burn alive. And you're going to be eaten alive. Jesus is doing this to give his people something tangible, something that we can visualize. I'm only going to go to one passage where Jesus talks about this, because Jesus really does not describe it a lot. It's self-descriptive. You want to know why Jesus doesn't describe a hell to his followers? It's because he uses the word Gehenna. They already know what Gehenna looks like. In fact, most of them have probably dumped something in Gehenna. Matthew chapter 10, and begin in verse 26. Jesus says, "Have no fear of them, for nothing is covered." He's talking about not having fear of the world. Don't care about somebody who ridicules your faith. He says, "Have no fear of them. Nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light. Never be ashamed of your faith. Never be ashamed of Jesus Christ. What you hear and whisper, proclaim on the housetops. What you know about God, let others know. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot destroy the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. Or, if you want it from the Jesus words, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. It gives us a healthy respect for the wrath of God. God is a loving God. He's a kind God. But God, like every other individual, has his limits of what he's willing to put up with. And I shudder for the society in which we live. I shudder because of the depravity. Last passage is from Revelation chapter 20. You know, I could end it right there, and I could tell you what a terrible place hell is. But I hate ending on a negative note. So I want to tell you about the rest of the story, as Paul Hartley used to say. I want to tell you about heaven. We don't want to go to hell. What we do want to do is go to heaven. We want to make heaven. Revelation chapter 20 and in verse 12, John says, and I saw the dead, small and great, stand before the throne, and the books were opened. These are the dead that were in Hades. He says another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in them. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. And death and Hades, death is going to be destroyed. Hades is going to be destroyed. He says they were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. He says if anyone's name was not written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Thank goodness Revelation doesn't stop with chapter 20. Chapter 21, John says, then, after the destruction of the wicked, after the destruction of death, after the destruction of Hades, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. The sea was no more, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of the heavens from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Hear that? No more tears, no more sorrow. He says, no more death, neither shall there be any more mourning, or nor crying, nor pain anymore. The former things, he says, have passed away. It's motivating, isn't it? To think of where we don't want to go and where we do. It's odd to me. It is said by some who take surveys that 75% of Americans believe in heaven and less than 20% believe in hell. Hell is just as real as heaven is. And both are real. If you're here tonight and you're subject to the invitation of the Lord, I want to encourage you to think about these things. Allow yourself to be motivated to do what is right. You know, some folks might think it's awful hard. It's awful hard to walk down the aisle. It's awful hard to get in the water and be baptized. I'll tell you what's hard. That's difficult. I remember I was there. But I'll tell you, it's after that when Satan's trying to get you lured away. John says, be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give thee the crown of life. Maybe you're here and you're just not sure that your soul is safe. from that place we know of as Gehenna. Whatever you might need, whatever we can do in a way to help you, please, won't you let us know. Together we stand. Let's sing 361.